Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Holland from Employment Hero, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to be here with you today at this virtual careers fair to share my thoughts on what I think is a really important and indeed rapidly growing element of developing a career, and that's remote work. We've got an awful lot to cover today, so we might move quite quickly at times. I believe that the Q&A is open via chat, so if you'd like to participate and ask some questions, we'll try and do that in real time. But what we're going to be covering today is we're going to be exploring remote work, particularly from a candidate's perspective. We will have a little chat about where employers generally around the world, and particularly in my part of the world, which is Asia Pacific and Australia, where employers are currently at and how the remote work model is evolving. But mostly what I really want to talk about is how to make remote work successful for you as candidates and career and professionals, and try and provide some tips on how to develop your remote career, and help you understand how to get the most out of the best jobs wherever they are in the world. Firstly, just a little bit about Employment Hero. The reason being is that we actually are a fully remote business ourselves, and I'm going to be referring to us in some of our practices and use cases throughout this presentation. So I thought I'd just give you a very brief overview of what we do. So we exist for one simple reason, and that's to make employment easier and more valuable for everyone. And the way we do that is we're an all-in-one HR, payroll and benefits platform. So essentially what we try and do is help people find work, manage work, get paid and save from an employee perspective. And then from an employer perspective, we're really focused on that entire process from finding and hiring the right people, managing that talent right through to retirement, and helping make that as easy and compliant and valuable as possible. How do we do that? We do that via our web and mobile app. From onboarding into your new role to celebrating big successes with your team, to providing feedback, monitoring your progress and the progress of your teams against your objectives and key results. It's an all-in-one solution, including payroll and benefits. So that's how we do it and what we do. A little bit about us. There's some facts up there on the screen that cover off us as an organization. We now have over 750,000 employees on the platform across 10,000 different businesses. And there's 600 of us in our team, so we've grown quite a lot. But mostly we're really passionate about serving small and medium-sized businesses. SMBs make up 97% of all businesses on the planet. And more importantly, they employ 70% of all workers on the planet. They are the powerhouse of the engine of our economy. And we really enjoy trying to level the playing field and help smaller businesses compete with large enterprises to attract and retain the best talent. So that's a little bit about us. But as I said, I'm here to talk about remote work. And really the question when I think about remote work is why have we ever been working in offices, at least for the last 200 or 300 years? And the short answer is that historically we didn't have a choice. We didn't have the communication tools that we have today. We didn't have the ability to coordinate our activities. So management by seeing, management by walking around, management by physically being present was the way that we coordinated and collaborated. There were no tools and we didn't have the option, and so the office was formed, and it dates back centuries. The bigger question for me is why have we stayed like that since we've developed these tools? And the answers are probably something along the lines of that employers like it. It was an easy way to organize, and we developed a habit, and there just wasn't the pressing need. But of course, the events of the last 2 years have brought around a catalyst of change. The global pandemic has triggered a better way, triggered us and excuse me, forced us to think about better ways to organize ourselves and think about the most productive ways that we can organize ourselves. We now have the tools and therefore the opportunity to design how we work. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So we now get to ask ourselves, excuse me, what makes us the most productive? What processes are the most sustainable? and what gives us access to the best talent, we can actually think about the core fundamentals of what work is. And in actual fact, when you step back and think about it, remote work is actually the most productive way of organizing ourselves. But it requires us to reimagine how we've worked. With the office on the screen, 200, 300 years of working in offices and the habits we've developed, we actually need to think about how we break those. And it's a responsibility for not just our employers, but also ourselves and the role we play. And I'll come on to that from a candidate and employee perspective a little later on. But first, I really want to address this, which is a major misconception about remote work. This is not remote working. This is the working from home that we all probably experienced when in the last 2 years, we've been forced from our offices and been forced to make do. And I want to emphasize that remote work, as it's being imagined by us and others in the world today, is fundamentally different to working from home. I'm sure many of us can relate to this gentleman here in the screen, coping with all the rigors and requirements of work while managing stay-at-home teaching. What people have experienced over the last 2 years, traveling to an office was often removed. And so employees had to do the best they could with what they had in many circumstances. Certainly most people that I'm aware of, most businesses, when they first went out from the office at the beginning of the COVID period, really were hustling and moving to try and make the best of a difficult situation. As I mentioned, for many, it coincided with having to teach and mind their children. For others, family and flatmates sharing their house and having to share that space with multiple people. And the lack of tools and the lack of proper progress and proper workspaces, the lack of planning, it all happened in a hurry. And I think when we think about remote work, it's really important, not just from the employer and company side, but also from the perspective of an employee and indeed a candidate, that we think about and plan the way we work remotely, in the same way that for the last 200 years, we've been planning and making an effort how we work in an office. We need to redirect that energy to ensure that that's now that energy into how we work remotely. And so what does remote work actually look like? This is a big area. And there's no one truth about this. There's no ironclad gold standard here. But one thing is for certain, remote work needs to be about a structured proposition. And again, that's both the employer and the company, as well as the employee and the candidate. Remote work can absolutely be more productive and a more fulfilling way to work, but we have to exhibit behaviors, develop habits, and go about all of this with a purpose, with the goal in mind of making remote work as productive as possible, and indeed with the same effort that we would put into it. And that responsibility lies on both you as the employee, as well as the companies that employ you. There's an accountability on both sides. So up on the screen at the moment is a list of the stages of remote. As I mentioned, there's no one true model here. I've got a slightly cut down version. Indeed, for those of you who want to pursue and dive into this topic more deeply, perhaps the best thing I can refer you to is a gentleman by the name of Darren Murph, who's the head of remote for GitLab. He's been in that role long before the pandemic. So GitLab is really a business that you might want to check out, and certainly if you want to see what Darren has to say on the topic. But Darren's actually developed 10 models of remote and hybrid work. As I mentioned, we're going to consider just here briefly 5 to give you a bit of an understanding of how remote work can look in the early stages and in more advanced stages. And when I come on later to tips and advice around looking for remote work, understanding this and where that company is in this stage is really important. So obviously we start with no remote. These are businesses where we have to turn up at a certain hour, no exceptions, and we work in the office until it's time to go home. The first step is that remote is allowed by exception. It's tolerated. And typically it's only tolerated for some people in certain circumstances. It can often be parents who have to pick up a child, looking after a sick relative, whatever it is, but it's not something that is certainly encouraged, and it's really almost frowned upon and just allowed in certain circumstances. Once you get to remote allowed, it typically means that anyone can work remotely, but it's not encouraged. And importantly, under remote allowed, companies aren't typically facilitating it. And if they're not facilitating it and providing the tools, then it's very difficult to be productive and successful in a remote environment. So remote allowed is companies that have almost resigned themselves to having to allow people to work remotely, but they're not going to encourage it or facilitate it. Once we get to hybrid, we start to see some evolution in the way companies approach it. Under hybrid, you're still expected to attend the office some days per week usually, but we're starting to see processes to actually, because they acknowledge that everyone's going to work from home maybe a couple of days a week, we're starting to see some of the tools and some of the processes emerge that actually allow you to work effectively, work from home or wherever you might choose to work from. But the important thing is you're still tied to the city where the office is located, because you have to commute to that office 2 or 3 days a week. Once you move to remote first, however, all the roles are remote. Sorry, what happened there? All the roles are remote. You're not actually expected necessarily to attend the office. And we start to see the emergence of strong support from the business, from the employers, to actually make you effective as a remote employee. That will include documentation. It will include tools such as collaboration tools, whether that's Microsoft Teams or indeed Google, a suite of Google tools. You start to see the company investing in those resources. And then all remote, of course, is there are no offices. And asynchronous is the ultimate level where you're not actually required to communicate or collaborate in any real time. It's all done digitally. It's all done through documentation. There's very few businesses at that stage, but that just gives you some context, hopefully, for the kinds of businesses that you might end up working remotely for. So let's move on to where it gets really interesting, which is how do you actually build your remote career? And I'm going to go through about 4 or 5 different areas here and just try and give you some advice and some context as to how to go about finding and thriving in a remote job. And the first thing is preparing. Obviously, before you start, it's really important because this will assess how you set yourself up, will heavily influence how employers will view you and as a potential remote employee. All remote companies don't provide a local office, and indeed many of the people who are using remote to expand their workforce internationally won't have a local office, and so you'll be responsible for actually working from home or whatever space you choose. And there's a few important steps to think about. Literally, get your house in order. How are you going to work remotely? You need to think through these issues before you even start thinking about applying and looking for remote work. Connectivity. The obvious one is digital. You want to be able to be sure that you've got good connectivity to be able to engage with your employer and your colleagues through the various tools, whether that be Slack, internet, Teams, whatever it is, it's going to be done via the internet. So you need a strong digital. But equally social, and I'll come back to this a little later on in terms of how to thrive in your first 100 days. But social connectivity is super important. There's 2 ways to think about that: connecting with your colleagues digitally, but also continuing to connect with your community face-to-face locally. One of the big bonuses that we're seeing emerge from remote work is people spending more time in their local communities, engaging, whether it be with sporting clubs or hobbies or even family, being able to maintain that connectivity. You have to give thought to your working space, to your physical working space, your home office, and you have to give thought about the tools and equipment you need to be able to make that space effective. So whether it be noise, comfort, a good monitor, a good chair, all of these things you need to be giving thought to in order to be an effective remote employee. And my strong advice is you try and address these things before you even really get started to make sure that you're ready and set up for success. It's also fair to say that remote is not emerging across all industries equally. It's funny enough that it's primarily knowledge industries and roles that are primarily going remote and available through remote. This list up here is not at all comprehensive, but what you will notice is it doesn't include a lot of chefs or waiters or construction workers. Site-based roles are not going remote. Some of those businesses support roles will, but it's primarily the knowledge industries that we're seeing. So if you're thinking about a remote career, these are the kinds of service-based businesses, knowledge-based businesses that we're seeing a really strong rise in remote roles. Just to call a couple out because they may not necessarily be obvious, learning and education. Yes, when we think of education, we think of schools and universities and face-to-face teaching, but education is rapidly going online, particularly within businesses. So our own Hero Academy, which we use to help educate and train and share our knowledge with both clients and our team members, is all digital, it's all recorded, it's all available 24/7 anywhere in the world. Other roles here, obviously all the business support roles, so the accounting and finance through to people and culture roles. If these are careers that you're either pursuing at the moment or that you're interested in pursuing, then the good news is there is strong emerging trends around remote work, and the availability of jobs is there. So the next thing is to start talking about optimizing your profile. And this could be your CV, your resume. This could be the way you present yourself online through various social channels. There's a ton of great advice out on the internet generally around how to prepare a CV, how to write job applications and those kinds of things. I'm not going to go through those generically. What I wanted to do was just draw out some of the things that are specific to a remote role and really make sure that you're considering how those are presented through your online profile and your CV. These skills, really it's about showcasing your remote skills. So what are we looking for when we're looking to add to our remote team? Obviously strong communication skills. You need to be able to communicate in multiple forms, in this case, particularly written. There isn't that opportunity to pull someone aside in a meeting or have a chat to them on face-to-face. So communication skills is paramount. Collaboration and flexibility. You need to be a team player. You need to be able to demonstrate that you can work with people under different circumstances than just sitting in a cubicle in an office. The ability to focus and manage your time. What we're really talking about here is deliverables. You're going to be employees. You're going to be an employee as part of a team. You're going to be spread out. You're going to be responsible for managing your own day more than you ever have in the past. And so really being able to focus and manage your time. Resilience and adaptability is important, and autonomy and self-starting. So these are some of the skills. And again, there's lots of general advice out there around CVs and applications, but just remember, you've got to promote your remote skills in particular. The big area I wanted to talk about tonight, and we're going to have to move pretty quick because I'm conscious of time, but believe it or not, the world is not yet optimized for finding international remote work. International remote work is very much an emerging trend. Businesses like ourselves and GitLab and some of the other very large companies around the world are heading in this direction, but it's still relatively new. And so if you want to find a remote opportunity today, you need to be resourceful and you're going to need to invest a little bit of time. The good news is, particularly relevant to this forum and this fair, is that some people are working on it. We're currently working with Jobstreet, and in particular, a group called Jobstreet Select. I would say that, well, Jobstreet Select, for those who aren't familiar with it, helps connect great talent with great employers, great businesses. So think about them as in terms of search and helping companies find great employees and matching those employees to the requirements of the company. And we're now working with Jobstreet Select to extend that to international remote. So starting to break down the borders of local countries, local cities, and saying, why don't you open up your business to global talent, to the global talent pool? So what you see here on the screen is actually 4 roles that are currently live and being recruited for by, in this case, Australian companies, in this particular example here, although we will be working with them to expand that to companies all over the world. And these are genuine remote roles. These are companies that are actively looking for candidates in areas across their time zone, from Kuala Lumpur to Auckland. These businesses are open to employing people, the best people that they can find in the Asia Pacific region. We're currently with this launch focused very much, as you'll see by the roles, on technology and initially on development. But we have a very clear plan with Jobstreet Select to start to expand that. The best thing I can perhaps advise you to do is to head over to, in the virtual careers fair, head over to the Jobstreet Select booth. There's some people there you'll be able to talk to. I think Nini will be there, who's a fantastic recruiter that I've been working with from Jobstreet Select, and she'll be able to talk to you. I think if you go to the Careers Fair homepage and click companies and search for Jobstreet Select and click into that, you'll be able to jump in. I believe you'll be able to see some of these roles and you'll even be able to talk to Nini, hopefully, if that all works out. So encourage you to do that. This is one of the very few areas that exist today. Jobstreet Select are really at the cutting edge here. There aren't a lot of places you can go online and look for cross-border international remote work. And so my big tip to you, if you're really committed to this, is to start looking at individual employers' career pages. How you find remote work companies is part of the effort you're going to have to invest. You can search for the news. It's a lot of companies who are going remote first are really advocating and very visible. Once you find them, my best advice is that you head to their website. This is actually the Employment Hero website. And if you scroll right to the bottom of Employment Hero, you'll find this little button here called Careers. And as a full remote company, all of our jobs are offered remotely. If you click onto that, you'll start to see a couple of things. And this might be Employment Hero, but this approach or this format is very consistent with remote companies it's developing. What you'll see is information about the company. We recognize that you've probably never heard of us. You can't come into our offices and talk to us and meet us. So we want to try and explain and share a bit about what the company is about. So you'll see some information there about what we do and the values that we have. In fact, our values are stuck up on my door every time I come in and out. I'm reminded of our company values. And then the other thing you'll see the roles. So here you can see we've actually got 2 roles that are going to be based in Malaysia. They'll be remote in Malaysia. But most of our roles are actually remote first in the sense that we can fill them from any country, and you'll be set up to work collaboratively with your colleagues through our processes that we put in place. So I think as Jobstreet Select grows, and I would very much encourage you to get across to that booth after I've finished and have a chat to the team there, maybe apply for some of those roles, get your profile into that system. As that emerges, stick close to those kind of opportunities. In the meantime, it really is the hard graft. If you want to build a remote career, find the companies you want to work for that offer remote and do the hard work of getting engaged with those companies. So let's say that you've started to find some opportunities and now you want to evaluate them. What do you do? As I mentioned earlier, you can't necessarily walk down there and have a chat to people. So do your research on the employer. What do they do? What industry are they in? What clients and customers do they serve? What's their mission? What's their purpose? Really find out whether or not this is an employer and a business and an industry that you want to work in. Check out the employee value proposition. So obviously we all need to earn a salary, but a job and a career is about so much more than that. So the employee value proposition will include not just salary and perhaps benefits that they might offer, but it also includes things like career development. So what are the opportunities that you might have as a remote employee? Do they give all remote employees equal opportunities, or are they linked to the office and you really have to be in the office to get ahead? You need to find out and ask how they manage remote. So going back earlier to our stages of remote, are they giving you the tools that you need and setting you up to be successful in your remote career? And most importantly, perhaps, how will they employ you? One of the things that is emerging that is coming up with the emergence of remote work is whether or not companies can legally and compliantly employ you and ensure that all of that is taken care of, all the important things are taken care of. Everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with the concept of contracting. Contracting is effectively a type of engagement where the primary focus is you do some work and you get paid. But it's different to employment. employment really means that you not only get salary with all the benefits, but things like social security. So if you're working in Malaysia and there are obligations of employers in Malaysia to ensure that taxes are paid and remitted, or that pension and retirement benefits are remitted, social security insurances. And also, so it's really important that the obligations in the country where you live and work are met and fulfilled, and those obligations don't come back to you as the individual in that local country. Also, job security and legal protections, an employment contract that's compliant with local regulations in all the countries that we're active in, that this fair is going around. There are important protections that governments ask. So think about how they're going to employ you. There are an emerging tool, employer of record is a term you might hear. We at Employment Hero offer one. Ours is called Global Teams, where we actually help our clients and we employ people on their behalf to make sure that we take care of all the local obligations compliantly. Moving along, you've now applied for some roles and you're really looking to nail the remote interview. As a remote interview, this is your key opportunity to demonstrate your remote readiness. So you really want to focus on this opportunity to demonstrate not just why you will have all the skills for the role as in a normal job interview, but you want to actually make sure you can show that you're competent to work remotely and digitally. So make sure you have a test run through the technology, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Meets, Skype, any of those technologies. Make sure that your computer's up to date, got the latest versions, and that you actually have a test run with it. Use your dedicated workshop. Remember, step one, my first piece of advice was get set up. Use the dedicated workspace, whatever that's going to be, whether it's the corner of your bedroom, the kitchen, the local library, if you're allowed to talk, wherever it is that you're going to be set up from, use that. Manage the noise, manage the pets, manage the distractions. So demonstrate that you can have an interview and can work in that. A backup hotspot is a key. The number of times I've had interviews lined up with people and their Wi-Fi shuts down and they don't have a backup, it's a really key demonstration that they may not have the facilities yet to be able to work remotely and be connected and properly connected to their teammates all the time. Remember to showcase your remote skills. So again, there'll be the core vocational skills around the role that you're applying for, but make sure you show that you can listen, that you're able to clarify what's going on, even though you're not physically with the person, and make sure you dress properly, no pajamas. It's really important that you dress for the job you want, as you would in an office-based face-to-face interview. So then a final thought is about your first 100 days. Working in a remote business is actually a very different experience to working in an office. Make sure that you understand that going in, and here are some tips. Establish a daily routine. You may no longer be getting up and getting on a bus or a train, getting a ferry, going to the work. Make sure though that you still establish the daily routine. Take advantage of your time savings. This is something I learned from Darren Murph, who I mentioned earlier. Use that time that you would have spent commuting. It used to be an hour each way in the morning and the evening for me. I now try and use that time. In the morning time, I use for my own self-development. So I try and get exercise. I try and spend time with my family as they go off to school. And in the evening, I actually dedicate that to work and try to make sure that I can progress the goals that I'm responsible for at work. Leverage your digital calendars. Make sure that you set up reminders. You're not going to have colleagues sweeping past your desk saying, come on, you're coming to this meeting. So use your digital tools. Seek out those opportunities to socialize and bond with your colleagues. Virtual coffees, catch-ups, those Zoom calls with lots of people on it talking about work. Stay on for 5 minutes after everyone else leaves and just chat to your colleagues and get to know them outside of the intensity of a meeting. And big tip, try to keep your camera on. And I know that a lot of people can't necessarily, but we really enjoy it in terms of when people can keep their camera on and we can see their colleagues. So look, that's everything I had to say today. I think there's one question come through. You can send some more through if we've got time. The question is, how does a company prevent their employees from taking advantage of working from home? Not so much a candidate-focused question, which is really what I wanted to focus on today, but if you're an employer, we've actually got a ton of resources on our website. You can Google Employment Hero, The World Awakens, and there's a series of about 7 or 8 videos that discuss these kind of topics in detail. But to the person who asked that question, the really quick answer is, it's really about the team that you build and the way you set them up for success. So I'm not going to give you a specific answer, but you need to recruit people who are capable of being responsible for themselves. You need to set up the company culture, including the policies and instructions, to make sure they understand what the expectations are, and that if it requires 8 hours to get the job done, then that's that. And then finally, make sure that there is personal accountability, and that you've provided the tools for them to understand what their objectives are, and put the focus on achieving those objectives rather than necessarily being in front of a laptop for 8 hours. But as I said, check out the website, because we spent 7 episodes of a webinar investigating that. I've got a second question. I'm going to keep talking until Edmund cuts me off. Right, I'm going to take the last question. By working remotely, do you think an employee needs to attend to work messages 24/7 when you receive one? Yeah, absolutely not. In fact, I don't know if people have seen the recent laws introduced in Belgium, where it is now completely illegal for an employer to force someone to respond to a message after work. But in other parts of the world, it comes back to that cultural element. So make sure that you recruit a team that understands that they have boundaries. Make sure they know what their goals and objectives are for the day, the week, the quarter, and focus on delivering those. And if they're delivering those, it's time to cut off. If they're not delivering those, you need to perhaps revisit whether those objectives are realistic. So definitely, I don't think that working from home means working 24/7. With that, I'm getting wrapped up. Really, thank you very much for the opportunity to chat. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, I think, and if you've got any questions, very happy to talk more about this topic. For that now, I'll say good night.